Hey, this week on the 167, we have Trudy George here to talk to us about suffering and motherhood. Welcome to the 167. Hey, welcome back to the 167. Today I am joined by Mrs. Trudy George. Say hi to everybody, Mrs. George.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, and this week you're joining us because you gave the message this week, and I thought it was fantastic. I know that every time somebody's like, I loved your message, that usually means like you did a funny joke, but I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was a great message. I thought it was challenging. I thought it was well thought out and just really kind of brought out the text, so I really enjoyed it.
And I did a funny joke, right?
You did?
Because I am funny.
Was there a funny joke in there?
I am funny.
You
Nobody
are
understands
super funny.
that, but I'm really funny.
You're savage.
I crack myself up anyway.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here in the podcast and for bringing the message this week. It was Mother's Day this week, so happy Mother's Day belated to all the moms out there watching and listening. And I just wanted to start that by having a time that we could honor our moms, or / you could honor yourself and be like, here's what I do as a mom. But what is something that you remember your mom doing that was kind of a mom thing that you were like, man, that was just a good thing?
My mom did a lot of good things. I was born in 1961, so it was a very traditional time. So we did dinner, like we always ate dinner. She always cooked everything. We did get to go out occasionally, and that was always special. But my mom was just always a solid believer. So church was a really important thing. And there was a time, like, I didn't know this when I was a kid, but like looking back, I could see that my mom was a spiritual leader of our home for a lot of years, a lot of different years. And she just never gave up. She just kept going. We were always involved in church. We were always talking about God. She was always with us. We were always doing something.
Right.
Like, she was just a good mom.
So she was super involved, super active.
Yes.
That's good. I was reflecting, and even when you and I were talking about this before the podcast, I was thinking about my mom and the role that reading played in our family. And my mom always read to us before bedtime. I have some books even that I read to my girls now that my mom read to me. And it was like, it continued probably longer than it should. You know, like people that have like their blanket until like they're in sixth grade. My mom read to us before bed, probably like till third or fourth grade. And Carissa does the same thing. She reads books with our older girls who are 14 and 15, just on the couch. And we used to go to the library on Wednesdays for Library Day. And that was the one time when we got to eat out that week, was we would go to Garcia's Pizza and have cheese on whole wheat. And we got a couple of quarters to play Galaga. That was a very big deal that we got $1 worth of quarters.
She was a very generous mom. Then.
Yeah. So, but it was always around reading. It was like, it was Library Day, or it was, like reading to us. So that was a big part. And when we were talking about that, I just reflected, like, is that why I married an English teacher? Like,
it could be.
She was setting me up to love books and love women who love books. So this week we were continuing in 1 Peter, and we were talking about suffering, right? And so you made a comment.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
No. Every time that we get up there, you're like, I don't know what the staff is thinking. Pastor Rick picks the sermon schedule. Every time it's
I'm blaming it on all of you. I blame him too, but it's on all of you.
I'm always like, I feel
like... Because somebody
like...
could have stood up and said, wait a minute. Do you realize what Mother's Day is going to be? But
I'll tell Pastor Rick, and the next time I'm in a meeting, I'll be like, Trudy insisted that I stand up and say, you can't do this. And he's like, you're fired. And I'm like, fantastic. I'll see you later. Thanks, Trudy. But we were talking about suffering on Mother's Day because, when men sit around and plan something, we think, oh, mothers and suffering because you suffer for us.
That's
we
true.
love it. We want to honor that. But you made a comment that was suffering may stem from people we know. So I just wanted to unpack that a little bit more. So, like, how should we interact with people close to us that bring us trials? Because even you kind of mentioned, like last week, we were talking about cancel culture. Or a couple weeks ago when I was talking about cancel culture, it's like sometimes it's people close to you. It's your friends, your family that go, hey, we can't be friends anymore. We can't, because of something you believe or something. So how are we supposed to react when somebody really close to us brings us suffering?
Yeah, I was thinking, like, what was Peter trying to say to these people? And I wonder, and he doesn't really tell us, he doesn't write it out for us, but I wonder if part of it was like Christianity was new.
Mm.
So these were probably Jews that were coming out of Christianity, and they're surrounded by Jews, by godly people, right?
Yeah.
That hadn't received Christianity. I thought that's exactly where we are today, too. So that it's not even just that they're close to you, but that they would consider themselves godly people.
Because a lot of people do today. They consider themselves, oh, I'm religious, I'm spiritual,
Right.
I love Jesus, but I also want to participate in everything the world has.
Right.
And then they're looking at us and punishing us
Right.
for being more.
Yeah, like the cancel culture thing. And I guess I think that what he is saying and what I've experienced is you do that. First of all, you keep the hope.
Right.
You keep the hope that this isn't forever, that there's going to be restoration, that things are going to change, because as he's talking about it in terms of, like them out partying and going crazy and living this wild life, I'm sure that those people that are now being slandered from them are praying and believing that those people are going to come to Christ, and that's not going to be their lifestyle, and they're
Right.
going to, not be happy about that slander. So I would say that's where we should be too, that we keep the hope that this isn't going to last forever, that there may be restoration, there may not be restoration. And then I think you just keep going down, the list, that we have to pray fervently for the people who are slandering us, and pray fervently for ourselves to stay in connection with God. We have to love them deeply. We have to take care of them.
Right.
Like, we don't throw them away. We don't have, it may be a different taking care of. You may not be as connected. You may not be around each other all the time like you were before when you were out partying, doing your stuff, and hanging out together. But you will still continue to care for them, and then what's the last one? Take care and serve them. That's it.
Serve them.
Serve them. Yeah.
Well, and some of those things, I just want to break down some of those things, because I loved it when you're talking about taking hope and keeping hope. I deal with a lot of people, and it's like you just want to look at them and be like, and even is it Christ says, "Take hope, I have overcome the world," and it's just like when I talk about taking hope or keeping hope, like I often wonder, like, what am I actually doing actively to do that? Like if somebody comes to me and they're depressed, they're having anxiety, or if I start to feel that way, I go, man, this just feels hopeless. And it's like when someone says you have to take hope, like it's not just like hope is passively just washing over me. You know what I'm saying? It's like, because mostly the world is going to wash over you and it's going to be despair. Like you
Right.
really have to take and cultivate. You have to grow hope almost like a garden. And I often like wonder, like, what am I doing in my life that is keeping hope and taking hope? And so I think that a lot of it is, it's more than self-talk, but it's surrounding myself with people who have that same hope. It's like that,
Right.
that again, it's the people close to you that somebody else is not going, no, you should give up. It's not Job's wife where she's like, just curse God and die. It's just like, so like, I think keeping, something, but like, what are some of the things that you do to kind of take hope or keep that hope?
I think the first thing that came to my head was to take every thought captive. And that's for me, that's where I take action.
Yeah.
That I can't let thoughts that are not full of hope, that are not true about what our hope is. Our hope is not in this world. Our hope is not in, and like I said, I said a little bit about my eschatology, what I think about the end times, but like I don't feel like there's
I was like salivating when you said that.
I
was
know.
like, oh my gosh. And then you said that, I was like, oh, she's pre-trib.
Yes, I am. But I feel like that as we go through life and we go through times, to understand that things may not get better. That doesn't change our hope, because our hope is not in what is down here. Our hope is what is eternal, what's to come, and where we're going. And again, not to say that we live here in depression and we hate it, because, I feel like Paul said to live as Christ, to die as gain. So to live as Christ means every day has a purpose and a reason. But it's not the gain. The
Right.
gain is heaven when we die. So to keep that perspective that things may or may not change, that doesn't affect our hope, because our hope is not in what's going on here. Our hope is in the future. So for me, that's a mind game,
Right.
because the enemy wants to come in and tell me that's not true, that you're not going to make it through this, that this is too hard, that this is, whatever it is. And, to remind myself, this is not my hope.
Right. And so when that intrusive thought comes to you and it says, you're not going to make it through this, are you going, no, the scripture says this? Or are you just saying, I don't believe that's true? Are you praying to God? Like what's kind of your go-to in that moment, do you think?
Probably my first thing is I go and cry, then I wait, then I get off the floor and I say, that's not true. I'm not doing that. I'm not believing that. And then I tell myself the truth.
I like the Elijah method where you go take a nap and you wake up and you have a cake and then you go back to sleep again and have a second cake and then you get up and deal with it.
That sounds good.
And then you get up and go with the Lord,
Yeah, I'm not saying I have it under control and that I know how to do it, but I know the truth of it, that when the thought comes, if I deal with it immediately and speak the truth, then that allows that truth to be taken captive, or that lie to be taken captive.
And then instead of spending your whole afternoon thinking about the despair, you go, no, that's not true. And you get on with your life.
And I think prayer is the huge part of that. And so many times, and there wasn't time to talk about everything, but I think so many times we think that you don't have a good prayer life if you don't sit down for 50 minutes and, close your hands or lay on the floor. But our lives should be lives of prayer, to where everything pushes us back to God. Everything, we take it back to God. It's just a part of our life. And I think for me, that's a huge thing and I know that I said the whole thing I don't understand about, and I still don't understand prayer. Like, I want checklist. If I do this and this and this, then God's going to do this. And, and
have
that
you considered Catholicism? They would love you there.
And I would be a good Catholic. I would be.
Like, I did 16 Hail Marys and 3 Our Fathers.
I love the rules. I love to be able to check something off, but I don't think that's truth, and that's not who God is. So even though I say that I don't understand prayer, it is my lifeline. It is how I make it through a mad world, by taking everything to God and saying, God, this is yours. God, what do I do here? God, what does this mean? And sometimes I get an answer, sometimes I don't.
Yeah, it's crazy. And like, I always tell people, like, I have crazy prayer things where I'm like, I pray out loud. Like, I'll wait, like the kids will go to bed. Usually Chris will go upstairs and get ready for bed, and I have about 20 minutes. And I sit there in my living room and just talk. And I'm just like, and people are like, really? I'm like, oh yeah, it's great.
I pray out loud too, all the time. Because I think for me, it helps me keep my head focused.
Yeah, otherwise it's like, dear Jesus, like sleepy time. But
I'm not a sleeper like that, but.
Well, you brought up that great thing you talked about, where it's on average Christians pray for about 45 seconds a day. And that's, I'm sure everybody's shocked by that. And I'm like, and so it was really funny because throughout the rest of that day, then like when we would pray for our meal, I was like paying attention. I'm like, so if it's, dear God, thank you for this food, help it bless and nourish our bodies, in Jesus' name, amen. That's 15 seconds. Like I'm going, that really isn't it? So then I'm going, do I need to space this out? Like our food's getting cold. It's just like, Lord, thank you for the peas and the steak and, the cow that you made. And I'm like, how can I lengthen this? But really it's the end of the day thing. Like some people are morning risers where they get up and they pray at 5 a.m. That is not me. So, but I'll pray at the end of the day and just spend some time with the Lord. But
what I thought was funny about that statistic, I thought, how did people decide how long they prayed? Is that what they did? They prayed over their meal, and that took 15 seconds. And so if I do that 3 times a day, that's 45. Like, how did they come up with that number? I don't know, but I'm trusting the number.
I don't know. I just think you need, what is the equivalent of an electric toothbrush for prayer? Like, can we get like an electric rosary or something where it just vibrates until you're like,
well,
you're supposed to
doesn't that echo prayer thing kind of do that?
It does. You can set alarms, but you get to dictate that. It doesn't dictate. It's like
how long you pray.
Yeah, I mean, I think it should, like, through your Apple Watch, like measure your heart rate and your stress level and be like, you need 20 minutes today. You need to close this circle on your watch. Like, people keep track of their steps, but
You should come up with
You need a
that.
prayer app.
I don't know.
Somebody who's an app developer, we have $1 million idea right
Yeah.
now. So
I've
it's
got a
like,
couple. We've got a couple things going.
that's a whole other podcast though.
Nothing's ever happened yet, but we got some ideas.
Well, and I wanted to ask you kind of along this line. I wrote down, I said, we act like suffering is unexpected as Christians. We just go, I'm supposed to suffer, And so I said, why are Christians more woe than wow when we encounter trials? If you go to work and you're like, hey, Jesus loves you, and and your boss is like, no, you can't do that here. You're fired. Why are we not like, oh my gosh, this is so great. I got fired, for my love for Christ. We're like, how am I going to feed? Like we think that all of a sudden God's going to be like, well, good luck to you. So why do you think that Christians are more woe than wow when it comes to suffering?
I wonder if we should say American Christians
That's fair.
or Western Christians.
Western Christians. I think the Canadian Christians are just as bad, but probably friendlier.
Probably. Or nicer about it anyway. Yeah, I think that probably is a Western culture thing that we just expect everything to. We live in a country where we have never had war on our soil. There's no way we can understand suffering. I should take that back. We did have a civil war, but as we see it in our life, like we have really never. We don't see the results of that. We don't see. So I think it's hard for us to understand that things shouldn't always go our way and be like we want it to be. So I do wonder if it's partly cultural that we view it like that, and if believers in other parts of the world would see it differently. I'm sure there's a human aspect to it that we want to be,
That's fascinating though, because you're talking about it as if almost like it's a spiritual discipline, like that. If you were used to suffering, if you grew up in suffering, you would know how to navigate that a lot better.
What do you think? I think that could be true.
I think that that's feasible. I think that's part of what fasting is. Like, I think that a lot of people misinterpret fasting to, I'm going to fast so I get my way with God. It's almost like holding our breath.
Right.
It's like,
Yeah.
well, I'll show you, I'm not going to eat until you give me what I want. And I'm like, but some of it is a pious thing where people are like, oh, I fasted for a reason, or I fasted, and I think that that's a good thing to fast so that God changes your heart on something or whatever. But mostly I think that we should fast to tame our flesh, to be able to say to our bodies and get used to not getting our way, to look at our body and go, listen, if I can go without food for 24 hours, then, when it comes to a temptation, I can say no to it. If I can sit there and go, no, I can starve myself for 3 days, then when someone offers me, I'm just going to pick low-hanging fruit. If someone offers me drugs, I'd be like, no, I don't want drugs. They'd be like, but it's so great. And I'm like, well, food's great too, but I can also say no. Like I can say no to the basic necessities of life, that sustain my life. So of course I can say no to pornography. Of course I can say no to, something that's a substance, like, of course I can say no to doing this sin because I am disciplined through suffering. So I think that fasting might be a form of that. It's obviously not something as traumatic as, like you said, like if you were in the Ukraine right now and going through like a war-torn, like season, for your country, that's a little bit different than, giving up McDonald's for a day.
Right.
But I think that it certainly is things in degrees of, I think that's what fasting is. It's acclimating to suffering a little bit.
And I think that we have kind of been taught in the Western church that, God, you're saved so that you'll be happy, healthy, wealthy, wise. Life is going to be like roses. Like we kind of are taught that.
Yeah.
That Jesus is going to come and take everything away and make life beautiful, which he does, but he doesn't take away the results of living in a sinful world, which is what suffering is. It's the results of living in a sinful world.
Right. Well, people misunderstand when, like, I think the same Christians will say spiritual warfare when they come out and they have a flat tire, but they don't accept that reality, like you're saying, where it's like, well, I love Jesus, therefore I have a force field around me. And I'm like, you have a spiritual force field around you, certainly, that, like, I don't think that you can, it's kind of like, I don't think you can be tormented. I don't think that things can get at you in the same way. But it's not that you have a force field, you have a shield and you have a sword.
Right.
And if you don't, learn how to use that, then you're just as vulnerable as you were without it. You need to learn how to use that. But also, you're in a battle. And so if people want to say spiritual warfare when they get their tires popped, but they don't think that certain places in their, their livelihood, for instance, can be attacked by the enemy. Well, you're guaranteed victory, but you're not guaranteed that you are immune from the battlefield. And so, like people go, I think that Jesus has the victory for you. And sometimes that's, here on earth where you're like going, oh yeah, like it's through prosperity, it's through a blessing or whatever. I'm going, yeah, it's great. But like you said, ultimately you are storing up treasures in heaven. You are, doing that eternal thing. And so, but I think that suffering part of mentality is like people like don't expect it. I'm like, if you say spiritual warfare, that's a war. Like things are not, not every day is going to be a good day.
Exactly.
Like you can still win the war, but you might lose a buddy. You might, like there's a bunch of stuff that can happen.
Well, and you look at the Israelites taking the land. So the very beginning of Israel, so when God takes them into the promised land, I think in our Western heads, they walked in there, and because they won the battle, nobody was killed.
Right.
And I don't think that's true. I think people died in that battle. They still won the battle, but there were moms that were grieving and wives that were grieving because of
while
what
everybody
happened.
else celebrated.
Right. And they were probably celebrating too, just like we see with our military men. Like we're celebrating too in the overall context, but we're grieving at the same time. And I think that's our suffering, where we are understanding it like that we can suffer and we can be victorious at the same time, because the victory is overarching. It's the big story. And what the suffering is the the subplot to get, not even to get to the victory. The victory's already there, but the subplot helps us understand the victory maybe in a different way.
Well, you also brought up a really good point, which was the differentiation between suffering for Christ and just suffering. Like some people will come to me as a pastor and say, why is this happening to me? And I'm like, because you live in this world, like, a tree fell on somebody. It wasn't a demonic attack. Like, they cut the tree wrong, and that, that's what happened. And so, I don't know why that was the analogy just now. That was weird. But so
you've been watching YouTube videos of
it's like
tree
lumberjacks
trimming.
and stuff. It was actually an episode of Elena that my kids were watching. So I'm just sitting there going like, things just happen to you sometimes. It's just suffering. And then there's suffering for Christ's sake, which is like, hey, I went to work and shared the gospel and I got fired. That's suffering for Christ's sake. And so I think that sometimes people are like, why does God give me his toughest battles? And I'm like, no, you spent all your money and now you're in debt. Like that has nothing to do with Christ. It has nothing to do with God.
And I think it's interesting that like Peter talks about, he doesn't talk about physical things in this suffering. Both of the things he talks about are relationships, really. I mean, yes, you have there's a physical reaction to it, but it's not because of you doing something or you not doing something. It's because of relationships that you end up, whether you know the person or you don't know the person.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting as I was studying that he wasn't saying you didn't get the first parking space at the mall. And so,
toughest battles.
That's right. The enemy is against you today. He's saying, like as we look in relationship, that's probably where our biggest sufferings are coming from, and to understand that and to be okay with that and to rejoice.
Yeah.
Which is way beyond it's not our first thought.
Oh, no.
Not our first thought.
And I think that is something that's interesting in the Western culture as well, is if you ask, like I was talking to Chris about this, I said, if you asked husbands to take a bullet for their wife or kid, they would not hesitate. If you asked them to give up video games, they'd be like, or if you asked them to give up a friend or like, so there's like, we would rather die than suffer, I think. But so
I would rather die than suffer.
I mean, that's fair, like, would you rather die or be tortured? And we're like, I'd rather die, and so, but in that suffering, like when we were talking about like the relationship thing, I think some people it'd be that I'd give my life for somebody in a heartbeat, but now I have this awkward relationship with my in-laws that that now I have to,
that I can't even give them grace.
Yeah. And so I know I have to show up at Thanksgiving, and I know they think I'm a jerk, and I think that they're dumb, and it's just like we'd just rather not go,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that the Bible's is so focused on that, like you said, because there's these passages that it's like, oh, if you're a believing wife with an unbelieving husband, you need to stay, and then, but there's also those passages that say like, this gospel, it's going to separate fathers from sons and mothers from daughters. And I don't think that that means that we as Christians are the ones who are doing the separating. I think that it's when we come and we say, hey, listen, this is the way that I'm going to live. People go, well, I'm out.
Right.
I cannot be in your presence.
And I feel like that's the whole thing that he is saying in this whole passage in 1 Peter 4 is, if you want to still be standing at the end, if you still want to be standing, this is where your focus has to be. And these are the things. And I hate it I love it when God gives us a checklist of these are the things to do. But then I hate it because we as humans try to make it a checklist. And I don't think that's what it is.
Right.
I don't think
He's like, for example, and you're like, those are the 5 things that I have to do.
Yes. And that is not at all what he's saying. But I thought it was interesting that he was saying, do this to the body of Christ. Like, this is what you need to be doing with each other, not focusing on everybody else around. But if you want to stand firm, you better be loving each other. You better be taking care of each other. You better be serving. You better be busy in the body of Christ. And that, I think, again, is a focus issue. That is going to allow our focus to be where it needs to be. So when the suffering comes, because it will, we will be able to stand. Even Jesus had his buddies praying with him at the Garden of Gethsemane. Like, he had that. They did a bad job of it, but
Maybe this is not the best example of it.
They were still there, though.
Yes.
I mean,
and he invited them into that.
And he had grace for them falling asleep. I mean, he was God and he knew them. But I mean, the same way with us. Like, we invite people into the church, into our lives. They're not always going to do it right. They're not always going to, do exactly what we need, just like they didn't with Jesus. But he still invited them. They were there.
Yeah.
And he saw that as being important, or he wouldn't have done it. Oh, I'm sorry.
It's a caller.
No one ever calls me on my phone. I was definitely not expecting that.
No worries. But I think that that's a great point, just because it's that same thing of, like you said, where it's inviting other people into that. I talk to so many people that they're just scared. Like, somebody will come and they'll even be in an accountability relationship with somebody, and they'll be like, well, I think that they fell down on their accountability piece. I'm like, okay, did you go talk to him? Well, and I'm like, this is the whole purpose of being a body, is that you look at people and go, hey, listen, I don't know about this. Can we go to coffee and talk about this? And it's like, well, then I'm judging them. And I'm like, well, you're not supposed to judge the world, but we're absolutely supposed to hold each other accountable to Christian living. Yeah. So, and usually that conversation goes a lot better than you think it's going to go.
And sometimes it doesn't.
And sometimes it doesn't.
Which is fine too. And again, I think as we go back to 1 Peter 4, his focus is really not on fixing everybody else.
Yeah.
His focus is saying, stand firm.
Yeah.
Because you want to stand firm through this suffering so that you will receive the blessing that God has for you. And yeah, I think fixing people is that's a whole other issue that we have that. And I don't know if that's Western culture. I don't know right. What that is, but
every parent knows this to be a truth, because if your child is out with other children and they say, you should come do this with us, and your child says no, and they stand firm and they come home and say, my friends asked me to go do this and I said no to them. As a parent, you're like, well done, my good and faithful child. Like, here's more privilege, here's more, responsibility, here's more, you just want to reward them. Like, that's just. It just seems like one of those things that is an evident truth, and it's going to apply to God as well.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being here, like I said, and thank you for the message this weekend. It was really good. I really got a lot out of it. I know the listeners did too. So thank you very much, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
We'll see you guys here next time on the 167. If you enjoyed this episode of the 167, make sure you like, subscribe, follow, get notified, leave a 5-star rating and a positive review. Tell all your friends to listen as well. Make sure you go over to newlifegardner.com and check out all that we have to offer as a church, and check out our messages online as well. Thanks for listening.